Dorsey Jackson Global.
I create.
One of my fondest memories as a kid happened during my 12th birthday party. It wasn't really a good party as I didn't have many friends, so it was just me, my dad, and a few friends from the neighborhood. We actually made that day a great memory. What actually made that day a great memory was the birthday present I got from my dad. A black 9mm pistol. Looking back on it now, I can recall the shocked look on the faces of the other parents, as I knew they were all asking the question, what kind of father gives his 12-year-old son a gun as a birthday present? But I didn't care about any of that, as I loved that thing with all my heart. Every single day after my 12th birthday party, my dad would take me to the backyard after school so that I could practice shooting it. I always looked forward to doing it with my dad, and it didn't take long before I was accurately shooting all the old cans off the fence. My father was a man who loved guns, and he made sure he passed that passion to me as I grew older. He had a large collection of guns, and I had learned all their names and attributes before I turned 18. We used the .50 caliber Thompson Center Arms rifle when we went hunting for deer and game in the forest, and the Remington model 870 was used when we went bird hunting. I really enjoyed learning about all these guns, and by the time I was 18, I went off to college and started collecting guns for myself. As time went by, I steadily increased my collection as I made sure I had all the basics. I acquired the Bushmaster AR-15 semi-automatic rifle and the M16 assault rifle. I even stumbled upon some gems as I managed to get my hands on the LeMat revolver and the Rockola M1 carbine. The more my collection grew, the more I became obsessed with collecting guns. It didn't take long before I was given the popular nickname, as everyone soon knew me as the Gun Nut. This was mostly because guns were all I talked about. I didn't pay any attention to the light mockery, as I spent most of my days at the shooting range, so having no friends didn't bother me much. Most people who met me always tried to talk me out of my gun collecting hobby, as they called it a misguided passion. All their effort to convince me was like pouring water on a rock, as I knew nothing was going to take away my affinity for guns. But after my experience on the 12th of February 2007, my mindset was changed forever. The day started out like every other. I attended my morning classes, and when I was done, I went to the shooting range to test out my new gun. After that, I went home and I realized that I was running low on supplies. So around 6 p.m., I made my way to the closest mall, which was the Trolley Square Mall in Salt Lake City, Utah. I arrived around 6:41 p.m., and after parking my car in the mall's parking garage, I started to make my way inside when I heard the sound of a shotgun. Shocked, I slowly turned around to see a man who was wearing a trench coat and a white t-shirt had attacked and shot an elderly man and his son. I had never seen someone shoot a human being before, so the sight made me freeze on the spot. I then watched in horror as the young boy managed to get away, but the elderly man who couldn't move, as he was now on the floor, was shot in the back and head. I instantly knew the man was dead, as I could tell the assailant was using a 12-gauge pump action shotgun, and I knew no one could survive a shot from that range. His assailant then started to make his way inside, and even though I was completely frightened, I knew I had to do something. So I ran inside the mall, screaming, "Someone call 911! A man has just been killed!" The people in the mall looked at me with perplexed faces, as I'm sure they all thought I was throwing a prank or being delusional. Since that didn't work, I started to frantically look for my phone so I could dial 911. But that's when another 2 dim-sounding shots were heard. Most people started to notice something was wrong now, although some still weren't convinced that it wasn't a prank. I finally managed to find my phone, and right as I was about to dial 911, I heard 2 loud shots coming from the entrance doors directly behind me. Before I could do anything, I felt searing pain ripple through my body as I fell to the floor. I couldn't feel the lower part of my left arm, and when I looked at it, I realized that I had been shot. The mall then went into a frenzy as people started to run and hide. I was completely frightened, but I still found the strength to run. I hid behind a pillar before slowly looking around to see if it was the same man who had fired the earlier shots in the mall's garage parking lot, and it was. I watched him walk into the mall as he scanned the area. The man then shot at a security guard, but he missed the shot as the man managed to get away. After that, he turned in the opposite direction and made his way down the hallway. As I hid there, I could hear repeated gunfire coming from the direction our assailant had gone. I couldn't find my phone anywhere as I realized I had dropped it when I fell during the earlier commotion. I didn't want to do it, but I had no choice. So I reached for the 9mm pistol that I always carried around with me. It took me a while to get the courage, but I knew I had to do something. So ignoring the pain from my bleeding arm, I followed the sound of the gunshots. I don't think I will ever forget the morbid scenes I saw as I followed the assailant. He had left a gruesome trail of dead bodies, and I honestly had to stop myself from screaming at every sight. The first thing I saw was the corpse of a woman who had been shot in the chest and head. As I kept following his trail, I heard another gunshot followed by the shattering of glass, so I rushed to the scene. It was a card store called Cabin Fever, and I saw an elderly woman lying face down in the shards of broken glass. She had been shot in the arm and stomach. I could clearly see the assailant now as I watched in horror as he pointed his gun at 3 people who were in front of the store. One of them was a young child. He couldn't see me as I was in a secluded area, so I readied my gun to shoot. I don't know why I hesitated, as I had been shooting guns all my life. But at that moment, my hands were shaking vigorously and I couldn't pull the trigger. So I just watched in fear as he shot all 3 of them. The man then left the store to reload his gun, and a woman, who I assumed was the mother of the little girl, started to crawl towards her still-moving child. I wanted to do something, anything, but I truly couldn't move. It didn't take long before the man came back, and with no hesitation, he shot all 4 of them in the head. As soon as the man left, I felt bile coming up my throat as I threw up. I cursed myself for not being able to shoot the guns I admired all my life, but even then, I knew why I couldn't do it, as I knew I would be no different from him if I did. I had seen them shoot people in movies numerous times, but nothing compared to seeing it in real life. I felt nothing but repulsion for the gun I had in my hand now, so I dropped it and I watched it fall to the floor. My mind couldn't take it anymore, so I started to make my way out of there. It didn't take long before I saw a police officer. He asked me if I was all right, but before I could speak, I collapsed to the floor. I had lost a lot of blood now, but I was still conscious. I then heard numerous gunshots to my right, and out of the corner of my eye, I could see the cops had found the assailant. The man was surrounded now, but he kept on firing his guns. The cops then quickly returned his fire, and within minutes, the man dropped dead. When it was all over, I was taken to the hospital by the paramedics. Luckily, I was only shot in the arm, so apart from the blood loss, I wasn't in a critical condition. The Trolley Square shooting shook everyone in the state of Utah and the entire United States. Over 6 people were killed and 4 were injured. The gunman was identified as Suleiman Tolovich, the person responsible for it all. Numerous investigations were carried out into his life by the cops as they wanted to find the motive behind the ghastly act, but after all their efforts, nothing was found. Apparently, the assailant's aunt and family were as shocked as the rest of the world because they all knew him as a good person. I stopped following the case after that, as I wanted to move on and heal from the incident. I eventually sold all the guns in my collection, as something that once brought me joy and excitement now made me feel fear and repulsion. I also tried to get my father to give up his obsession with guns, but he didn't agree. This has caused a lot of problems in our relationship, as there's now a huge rift between us. It's been 15 years since the incident, and looking back on it now, all it took was a couple of minutes to see firsthand what the guns I loved so much were capable of doing in the wrong hands.
When I was 19 years old, I learned something that has stuck with me for over 10 years. It feels like it was just yesterday when I learned that priceless lesson all women should carry close to their heart. A week before that traumatizing day, I visited the mall. I was a full-time nursing student and a full-time server at my local diner. This meant I was on my feet all day. I was only getting a few hours of sleep. And of course, That meant my feet were always killing me. I scheduled some time in my hectic schedule and walked into Foot Locker in my local mall. I resisted entering any other store. Beautiful articles of clothing calling my name as I walked through the array of stores. I simply didn't have the time for anything but to buy shoes.
Welcome to Foot Locker,
Smiled a middle-aged man wearing a green shirt.
we have a BOGO special going on. That means you buy one, get the second half off special.
He grinned as he finished his explanation. I explained the situation. I needed the most comfortable shoes in existence. I didn't care how they looked. I didn't care for the price. I needed relief for my feet. He nodded understandingly. He glanced at my feet. A few seconds passed, and still he stared intently at my feet. I was wearing some old sandals, and I began feeling self-conscious of his stare. He persisted, deep in thought.
You're a size 8 in shoes, but a 7.5 in sandals.
He whispered, still staring. Yeah, exactly, I said, a little perplexed. He wasn't asking. He was stating a fact.
I know just the thing.
And with that, he walked behind me. I took a seat and waited. A few minutes passed and he came back. He wore deep sadness on his face.
We don't have your size.
He said, as if ashamed.
But we can order them, and they'll be here next week.
His voice was heavy with despair. Hey, it's okay, I said brightly, trying to cheer him up. My schedule is a little tight, so I can't come next week, but I can pick them up the following one. He brightened up. We agreed I'd return, and with that, I left the store. As I left, a few of the employees stared at me curiously. They frowned slightly, as if I was doing something wrong. I dismissed it and left. I had a few minutes to spare, so I roamed around JCPenney. As I glanced around, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. I felt eyes on me, despite the store being virtually empty. When I turned to any direction, a body would quickly turn the corner, making me wonder if I was imagining it. I wasn't going to let my imagination ruin my only free time. I continued browsing. 4 weeks passed until I was able to visit the mall again. I was able to carve 45 minutes out of my schedule and rushed back to the Foot Locker. I was afraid my shoes had been sold to someone else since so much time had passed. Luckily, a familiar face greeted me as I entered late one evening before the store closed.
Hi, Jane,
said the man with the green shirt. How did he know my name? And was he wearing the same green shirt? I realized I was being paranoid. He must have seen my name from my credit card payment. That was still a little weird, but a pushy salesman is no cause for concern. It wasn't a crime to take interest in the client, right? I smiled.
Size 8 blue Nikes, right?
He winked. I smiled with discomfort. He ran with excitement and pulled a box from under a seat. Had he been waiting for me? The box wasn't in the back.
Take a seat, please.
I sat.
May I?
He said. But before I could answer, he fell to one knee and began pulling my sandal off. I was frozen with discomfort. I was deeply aware of his thin and wiry fingers touching the skin of my feet.
Hey, mister.
Came a stern voice behind me. He looked up from his kneeling position, but continued touching my feet.
Sir.
Repeated the voice behind me. The man in the green shirt focused his gaze on my feet, pretending not to listen.
We told you. You cannot be here.
The voice thundered. I turned and saw multiple employees, all in uniform, standing behind me. The man speaking wore a badge on his chest that read Manager. The man in the green shirt continued to hold my foot. Then, multiple things happened at once. First, the manager screamed, indicating the police were on their way. Secondly, a camera snapshot sound caught my attention. I looked back at the man in the green shirt and saw he had taken a picture of my feet while still kneeling before me. As my brain tried to digest and comprehend everything that was happening, the man in the green shirt lifted my foot close to his face and brushed his wet tongue from my toes to my ankle. My instincts jump-started my frozen terror. I kicked hard, knocking his glasses off his face, but he moved quickly. Within fractions of a second, he was up and sprinting towards the exit. As he made his way out, he looked at me and said,
Delicious feet, Jane. Just delicious.
He winked and was out sprinting. I sat frozen. Multiple employees comforted me, but all their voices were a blur. All I could do was stare at the saliva streak on my foot. All I could do was replay the feeling of a slathering tongue on my skin. The police arrived, and I explained to them that I had assumed he was the owner of the store, since he wasn't wearing a uniform and was so knowledgeable about shoes. I had assumed a lot of things, and they had all been wrong. I broke down in tears. The store staff and law enforcement comforted me, saying my mistakes were understandable. A lot of other women had assumed he worked there, though he hadn't assaulted anyone but me. I was filled with disgust, fear, and shame. But after filing a report with the police, I grabbed my things and left the store. I exited, seeking the nearest bathroom with urgency. I needed to wash my foot. I needed to clean it as extensively as humanly possible. I wanted to scrub that part of my body until my skin was raw. I did not want any remnants or trace of that disgusting man. The mall was deserted, as most stores were now closed. I rushed into a bathroom near JCPenney. I lathered soap onto my ankle and leg. The tears came again. How did I end up here, alone in a mall bathroom after hours, cleaning the disgusting saliva of a stranger from my foot? I balanced on one leg when the voice came.
Hello, Jane.
I turned, and in that instance, the click of a camera echoed in the bathroom. The man in green's head and torso rose above the bathroom stall. His phone's camera clicked again and again. I shrieked in horror and stumbled on one foot, but as I stabilized, the man in the green shirt shoved me against the wall. My body crashed against the tiled wall. I fell to the ground as he clawed and grasped my feet. He tore my sandals off and said in a shrill and chilling voice,
One more taste, baby. Just one more taste.
I laid, immobilized, back and head throbbing with pain. His hands possessed monstrous strength as he pinned me down, and his face began falling towards my feet. His tongue hung out of his mouth like a wild animal. A drop of saliva landed on my toe, his tongue exploding with anticipation. I shrieked with desperation. A voice responded from outside the bathroom.
What's going on in there?
Said a calm and elderly voice. The man in the green shirt snarled and looked up. He was more animal than man. The bathroom door opened. An old man sporting a janitor's uniform peeked in. His face contorted with fear as he realized what he had just walked into. The man in the green shirt lunged forward, pushed the janitor out of the way, and ran for the mall's exit. I had been saved. That horrific evening, I learned something I carry close to my heart. Never trust blindly. Never assume everyone is there to help you. Never believe everyone will do the right thing, because while I got out of it alive, it can ultimately cost you your life.
The world of horror content creators is not easy. People ask and ask for new videos without knowing how long it takes us to make them. I'm James. I'm 19. But until I was 17, I was a well-known urban explorer. In my early days, I was a paranormal investigator, but I never found anything, and my audience was getting bored. I went viral in a video that surpassed 1 million views, but my subscribers started to drop over time. After a few months of unremarkable content, I stopped making horror videos and dedicated myself only to explorations. My channel started growing again. Eventually, I made a new series of videos that consisted of me having the challenge of staying all night in different places. In the first videos, I stayed in the post office building, in a shopping mall, and a huge gym. For the next video, I had to target the most complicated place I had done so far. Walmart. I had everything planned. I was going to hide behind some cushions at closing time. I had a backpack with water and food. I didn't plan to steal, since there were cameras and they could expose me if they caught me. The world of horror content creators is not easy. People ask and ask for new videos without knowing how long it takes us to make them. I'm James. I'm 19. But until I was 17, I was a well-known urban explorer. In my early days, I was a paranormal investigator, but I never found anything, and my audience was getting bored. I went viral in a video that surpassed 1 million views, but my subscribers started to drop over time. After a few months of unremarkable content, I stopped making horror videos and dedicated myself only to explorations. My channel started growing again. Eventually, I made a new series of videos that consisted of me having the challenge of staying all night in different places. In the first videos, I stayed in the post office building, in a shopping mall, and a huge gym. For the next video, I had to target the most complicated place I had done so far. Walmart. I had everything planned. I was going to hide behind some cushions at closing time. I had a backpack with water and food. I didn't plan to steal, since there were cameras and they could expose me if they caught me. In the worst case scenario, I preferred to keep it all as a teenage prank. Come nightfall, everything went as expected. The guards seemed to look around the place without much interest, more focused on going home than finding someone hiding. I decided to let the time pass by sleeping, setting my cell phone alarm to ring a few hours later. In the early morning, I was awakened by the sound of my cell phone, and I pulled back the pillows. I looked around and confirmed that my plan had been a success. I was alone. I started to investigate the Walmart. I entertained myself in the games section and even watched the TVs for a while, documenting everything that was going on. At first, I thought this was going to be a complicated video to make, but it turned out to be the easiest one I had made so far. I was having a lot of fun exploring the place. But it all ended when I peeked into the food section and realized one thing. I wasn't alone. At first, I thought a guard had stayed longer without me knowing, but that person was dressed differently. The man was in a black t-shirt and short shorts, standing casually looking at the dairy prices. Upon noticing me, the man turned around, looking me straight in the eye, and started calling me like a dog, crouching down and whistling at me. As he slowly walked towards my position, I lowered the camera and stopped filming out of fear. I didn't know why, but this person didn't look like someone else making a challenge, or perhaps a homeless man. This person was someone who wanted to catch me and hurt me. As the man came closer and closer, my body, paralyzed with terror, managed to move back a few centimeters. Many people often question me and say that if they were me, they would have ran in desperation. But you'll never know how you'll react in such a situation until you're in there. As I stood there, I felt like an animal terrified of its natural predator. Standing there at 17 years old, thinking about how to escape, the face of evil slowly approached me. A few seconds later, which felt like minutes, he was already very close to me. Despite my fear, my body remembered how to react, and I ran away as far as I could from that man. Somehow, in just a few meters, I had him next to me again. His face was even worse than before. At least he was looking at me with curiosity. But since I ran, his face was only of happiness and malice. I thought about reasoning with him, but before I could speak, the man hit me very hard with his right hand, knocking me to the ground. I tried to stop him, but he climbed on top of me and prevented me from getting up. Tears ran down my eyes in despair, and he punched me incessantly in the face, smiling. My tears were confused with blood spurting out of my face. I felt like I was going to faint at any moment. The man seemed aware of my situation, so he stopped hitting me, and without saying anything, pulled a knife out of his pants. He looked at me smiling and threatening to stab me in the chest, but stopped halfway and continued laughing, tormenting me. Before I could react, he grabbed my right hand and slowly plunged his knife into my palm. The pain was indiscernible, as he did not immediately stab my hand. The man slowly pierced the knife in and began to twist it hatefully. Meanwhile, his eyes were still fixed on me. This man did not care about the damage he was causing me, but he enjoyed seeing the expression of pain on my face. A few seconds later, I heard loud noises behind us. It was the police, who had somehow found us. The man pulled the knife out of my body and went running quickly to them to try to kill them. But with several shots in the leg, he realized he wasn't going to win and had to give up. At first, they didn't trust me either, but after seeing that I was just a kid with bruises on my face and a huge hole in my hand, they had no choice but to believe me. When I was finally reassured that my life was no longer at risk, I closed my eyes and collapsed to the ground. The policeman rushed me to the hospital, but I had lost too much blood. Shortly after waking up and receiving the scold of my life from my angry but concerned parents, I learned that Walmart was not going to press charges for trespassing during the night. Even though no guards are monitoring the whole place, they have lots of cameras and people monitoring them at times, so they witnessed everything that had happened between me and this psycho. Speaking of him, neither the police nor my parents told me much. But a few days later, I saw the news, and I dropped the remote control out of fear. The man was a cannibal who enjoys savagely beating his food unconscious before devouring it. Today, I don't know what life will be like for this man or the rest of my acquaintances who had urban exploration. But after that day, I knew I had to give up this type of content. I won't have the same amount of viewers, but lately, I started telling stories of psychopathic killers. A lot of people think they're lies or that they're exaggerated, but they don't know how exaggerated reality can be and how a man almost devoured me in a Walmart.
Narrated by Dorsey Jackson of Dorsey Jackson Global at Compound City. Be sure to like and subscribe.